I'm Ernie Monsheen. I'm the chair of the Sundays at 2 committee, and I'm only up here for a minute. You're probably wondering why I have flowers in my hands, but that's an added bonus. Before we get started with today's session, I would like to recognize someone who has really been, the heart and soul of Sundays at 2 for so many years. Soon introducing our speaker, Kathy Calhoun, will be Elaine Weekly. Some of you know Elaine, maybe some of you don't. But we've known Elaine for a long time. As a matter of fact, she's been on the Sundays at 2 committee since 2005. And involved with the library throughout that whole period. And we're very thankful for that because she's brought so much joy to this community with her expertise and her creativity and her dedication. I mean, who does that? 17 years with the library, but she does that. And so Elaine, before you do your introduction, let's introduce Elaine Weekly here, and I have a little something for you, and let's give her a hand. Surprise, surprise. Okay, now the real program. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Yes, that's gorgeous. Well, welcome. It's so nice to see everybody today. I didn't see you. Welcome, welcome. We have a wonderful program today. Kathy Calhoun is going to talk to us. She grew up in a very small Texas town. The population was equal to that of a movie theater. I mean, small. But wait till you see how far she's come. She attended the U.S. Naval Academy and spent 10 years in the Navy as a civil engineer and CV. She started a successful seafood import-export business in Central America. Then she became a partner in one of the big 5 accounting and consulting firms, grew bored, and decided to grow fish in a greenhouse. But now she and her husband, Paul Gross-Clags, own Ditchley Cider Works, where she gets to exercise her passions. Everybody knows about apples, right?
Yes.
An apple a day keeps the doctor away. Well, we don't know what she's going to share with us. She's going to, I think we'll all learn and enjoy learning something about apples. She's going to take us she's going to begin where apples came to America, made their journey across to Virginia, and now she's in Ditchley Cider Works where she's growing her apples. And she's going to tell us all about that. How you plant, you choose, plant, care for, and then what you do with them after that. So, it is my great pleasure to introduce Kathy Calhoun.
Well, welcome, folks. If there's a few friendly faces in the audience, there's also a few not so friendly, looking straight ahead. Those are my neighbors, Sue and Ben Burton. So, what I'm going to do today is kind of walk you through a little bit of the history of Ditchley, and for folks that don't know about it. I'm also going to talk about what we do at Ditchley, which is kind of just twiddle our thumbs, sit around, have fun, drink martinis. None of that happens. Then we're going to jump into the apple component of it, and we'll talk a little bit first about where you plant. And I do that before I talk about what apples to plant, because it really does have an effect on what apples you pick for it. We'll talk a little bit about how you maintain them, what you do with them. In our case, it's produce cider. In your case, it may be just eat them or make applesauce. Talk a little bit about the resources that are available, both here locally and then on the national level. And then finally, I'll talk about our new passion and what's that saying? What happens in Vegas stays in Vegas. What happens in this room stays in this room. So I've learned A successful marriage and business means that you only tell your partner certain things. You always keep them guessing what's coming up next. And so the last bullet point is what's coming up next. So I keep him in suspense. Exactly. So, a bit of the background. Ditchley has been in continuous agriculture production since the 1630s. It was part of an original 1,000-ish land grant to Richard Lee the immigrant. So the first Lee that came across the pond back in the 1630s was both a lawyer and basically a legal scribe for the Jamestown colony and also for Lord Fairfax. So as part of that payment, he was given a 1,000-acre tract here on the northern neck. Basically, that went from 200 north, everything to the east of that, which includes Cobb's Hall, which is where the original Lee Cemetery is located, and then all the way down to Bluff Point. So that was a pretty big chunk of real estate for the original plantation. Where we are now transitioned to the fifth son, Hancock. So the fifth son of Richard Lee the immigrant, inherited 900 acres, built the first house on the property in 1686-ish, which is across the road, Ditchley Road, from where we are located. And it's continued in the Lee family until about the end of the 1700s when Lee married a Ball. And it transitioned into the Ball family, and basically was in the Ball family until we bought the property in 2014, not 1914. If it were 1914, I would have a different business called Rejuvenation. So, the original house, if you look at the big box there in the middle, see if I can figure out how to use the pointer. That big box, that is the original portion of the new house. That was built in 1752. This wing, which we call the Blue Room or the South Wing, was built in the 1840s. And then this wing was built in the 1930s by Jessie Ball DuPont. She purchased the property in the late 20s, probably as a replacement home for her home that had burned down in the 1890s, which was across Balls Neck Road from Shiloh School for it. So the property today is 162 acres. We have about 4 miles of deep waterfront. It's a peninsula. So from the door that you saw on the previous slide, that faces due east. There's about 340 acres on that peninsula. We have about 3 miles on Dividing Creek and then another mile or so on Prentice Creek. We placed all 162 acres in conservation when we purchased the property through a USDA program. So it will never be subdivided, it will never be built, and it has to stay in agriculture production in perpetuity. As I tell the rest of our family, I said, I pity the person who draws the short straw on this one. This is a shot of the pier that we just put in, which is in front of the third project that we're working on right now, which is the third house on the property, and that's Kitchen Cove. This does allow, and some folks have actually come to the Cider House via boat. So now you can get there on paddleboard, on inner tube, or on mechanized boat. So the original house and the grounds were obviously in the period started out in tobacco. From tobacco, lasted about 3 to 4 years. After that was spent, they transitioned into pig and beef production, which is very similar, as you'll see, to what we do today. They also got involved with import-export. They were granted a trader, T-R-A-D-E-R, not T-R-A-I-T-O-R, licensed by the Crown. So they actually began importing goods from Europe and exporting originally tobacco and then into large grains for it. So when we bought the property, it was kind of like, what are we going to do? The original and the underlying objective was to have the apple orchard. But then as we got into it, we saw that there was a lot more opportunity. So 2.5 years later, after renovating the house, the manor house is 11,000 square feet. I know every 11,000 square foot by inch, mainly by the floors, but we had to do a major renovation. Structurally, the house was in sound condition, but cosmetically, it had been basically untouched since Jesse Ball's passing in 1970. So this is the formal parlor, and this just gives you an idea of what we've transitioned into. We don't live there. We live on the little farmhouse over on Bluff Point Road that we bought back in 1987. This we use as an event center. So this is set up for a formal dinner. We do formal dinners, formal events, but also really focus more on the wedding side. Believe it or not, the Northern Neck has started to become a destination wedding site. Tides Inn has played a very large role in that, but a lot of individual properties in the area have been able to benefit from that advertising as well. We also have downstairs basically 4 main rooms that can be used for different activities, but predominantly set aside for our wedding parties and group. Everything has been structurally has been returned to what it was when Jesse Ball left the property. All of the furnishings in the house are things that we've collected over our, should I say, my 40 years of collecting antiques. The other half puts up with it. We also have 3 bedrooms. We in this house, we do not list this on Airbnb. We keep this only for our special event customers. So the second house that we have is the Cider House, and this is where we actually make the cider, which we're going to talk about a little bit later in the presentation. On the grounds, we have, on the far side, there is a tent, and over there, that's the very edge of it. So during the pandemic, it was just by chance. We had ordered the tent, it came, it showed up just in time, and all of a sudden we opened up and started having business outside. And of course, that was what everyone was looking for. So timing is everything, and for us, it worked out just wonderfully. This one we do list on Airbnb, and there's 4 bedrooms upstairs, but then downstairs in off-season, which is basically from the January through around the mid-April, we use this as our indoor tasting area. So about an hour ago, I was flipping pancakes for our brunch crowd, so I wear multiple hats. This is Kitchen Cove again, which the house that we're renovating is just behind this area, and once that's done, hopefully in about the next 3 months, that will be our next Airbnb, and then also the offering for our destination weddings for it. And then finally, in the holiday season, we basically focus on, if you will, the corporate Christmas parties and holiday celebration events. And we've done, I think, 3 of the historical societies have had their annual events, and then many of the local clubs also have their events at Ditchley. So as we started the production of apples, we realized that we needed to take an integrated pest management and an integrated animal husbandry approach. So what started out as just apples quickly turned into a lot of other quacking and mooing and bovine hoofed elements. So what you see in the back are the trees. These are about 2-year-old trees. The secret sauce in the orchard are those little boogers right there, and they're called runner ducks. If you have a pest problem, you don't have ducks. You need ducks. Anything from the ground to a 2-foot zone, if it crawls or flies, it's toast. Those guys are bug eaters on wheels. Unfortunately, there are quite a few winged animals out there called hawks and owls at night that really, really like a good duck dinner. So we polycropped with our geese. For every batch of ducks I bring in, I raise a gosling with them. The ducks think it's a duck. The goose thinks it's a duck. So the ducks herd the geese, the ducks, and life is good. The only thing no one told me in the literature is that ducks produce more than your white commercial layer hens. So we also found ourselves in the duck egg business and the goose egg business. The second component that we added in the integrated picture were the pigs. Originally, the pigs were our ground clearers and our, if you will, rototiller service, which they are both great at. But we also knew that when we got into our major production of cider, we would have large quantities of apple pomace. So that's the product that comes out after you do your pressing. So either that's a throwaway or a compost item, or if you have pigs, it is the finished food for your fall butchery. So we try to time each one of our litters so that we have our large production of the pork side that get fed the apple pomace going from August through about October, and then you'll see how they come out in packaging a little later on. The turkeys were originally just as part of what I call lawn ornaments, just eye candy. But we quickly found out that the ducks were great on the pests from the ground to about 2 feet, but you still have a lot of things like grasshoppers that are up in the tree proper, and you need something to get up there. Turkeys, and if you can put up with the noise, guinea hens are the secret on that aspect of it. So the turkeys and the guineas, basically, if you will, take care of the upper story of the trees for the pest management, while the ducks take care of the lower management. And then finally, we have our wonderful bovines, the belted Galloways. These are grass-eating machines. They are the last all-purpose cattle breed that is, if you will, commercially used. They cannot, and you will not find them in a grocery store because they will not finish in a stockyard on corn. They'll starve to death. They've got to have grass, and they've got to have large quantities of it. So our Belties, originally we were hoping that we could polycrop them in with the apple orchards. That didn't work out so well because anybody who's seen our Belties, they have dual hair. They have a winter very long coat and then almost a wool. So in the spring, when it's time to get rid of all that long hair, they want something to scratch on, and there's nothing that's more enticing than that wonderful limb on that apple tree low down. Yeah, there was not much left of that section of the orchard where the Belties were, so no longer are the Belties in there. So what do we do? Basically, this is all in an integrated, I call it a systems engineering approach. Well, what's an input into one process, whatever the output is, needs to be an input for another process so you don't have any waste. So the final output of those things that you saw before this are edible products. So we do both meat clubs, we do individual cuts for sale, we do sausage, bacon. Last year we went through sold over 5,000 pounds of meat. So, and you're looking at the sausage and the bacon cook. We also do our cider clubs for, in addition to just the cider tastings and the sale at the house. And this year we think we will have enough production now to start slowly moving into wholesale. We've done no wholesale up to this point, but starting this year, knock on wood, we hope we can. So that's kind of the history of the property. A lot of folks say, well, why? Did you buy the property just for an old house so that you could renovate? And it's like, no. It was basically an added feature that we saw on the property, but it was not the underlying drive to get the property. And that was a place to establish an apple orchard. Well, you say, well, why an apple orchard? Well, this was at the 5-year period where Paul was looking to retire. We do everything in 5-year planning increments, being very, very professional about it. Not really. And at that time, there was a big push from Virginia Tech about apple production for cider. And it was logical from their perspective because Virginia is the 7th largest producer of apples in the nation. You got your top 6 that are way up here, and then Virginia's here. But it's still a major producer. But almost all of the apple trees are out in the western part of the state. Not many on the, if you will, east of 64 or 95. So the more research I did, I was like, well, you know, apples kind of make sense. We don't want to do wine. We don't want to be behind the 570 other wineries that are out there. Let's do something different. And then it kind of hit me, well, you know, apples didn't start out in the Shenandoah Valley. Apples started on the eastern seaboard. They came over with all of our ancestors. And over 80% of those apples that came were from people who came from oceanic climates. Great Britain, you know, there's not a whole lot of 4,000-foot mountains in the UK. Ireland, Spain, France, Normandy. So the more research I did, it was, yeah, the apples, the 1600s, the 1700 apple trees that came over were all established on the East Coast and then slowly made their way out west with the folks that were making the great trek to the Great Divide. What survived, for the most part, are those out in the mountains, because when Prohibition hit, a lot of the people that were enforcing Prohibition didn't go out into that part of the world. That's where moonshine kind of stayed for a very long time for the same reason. Where they could be inspected and where orchards were torn out because of enforcement. So most of the orchards that were on the east coast of the U.S. were either voluntarily or mandatorily taken out during Prohibition. So if you go back and you kind of piecemeal what was left in the West, those were apple trees that over time had shown were better suited for a colder and a more mountainous climate. The original apple trees that started on the East Coast were basically forgotten because they'd just been all bulldozed under. So that was the challenge when we started thinking about what type of apples to plant, was to go back, do the research, and find out what were those original apple varieties that were here, that some migrated out west, but most of them got torn up or burned. So even before you start picking selections, the first thing you got to know, and this applies if you're doing at a home garden too, what is my land? What's my site? What are its characteristics? And there's two huge considerations for apples. First one, apple trees do not like wet feet. If you are in a low area, a drainage area, and you're going to see this on one of the aerial shots from our perspective, apple trees are not going to grow there. Number two, they need full sun and very good wind patterns, particularly in this part of the world because of fire blight. Fire blight will take out trees just about as quickly as wet feet will. So those are two huge considerations. The third one coming kind of behind that is calcium. If you go to Europe, some of the oldest apple trees you will find are in cemeteries. And there's a reason for that. There's a lot of calcium available in those plots. They love calcium. But that's another reason why apple trees, if you get the right variety, do very well in this part of the world, because we have a lot of calcium in our soil from subservial earlier years for it. So where to plant them? Well drained, good airflow pattern, full sun, and if you have a soil test and show that you have a high soluble calcium level, that's an added plus, but that's something you can always go back and amend for. So this is a drone shot taken probably about 3 years ago, and this is that's the Manor House, tent, the Cider House. That is Dividing Creek. Chesapeake Bay is right out there, and then Prentice Creek is over here. This is what we call our North Orchard, and this is our South Orchard. Our other two orchards are over at Bluff Point where we live. If you look right here, you see a distinct hole, no trees. All of these, there are 37 rows in this plot. all of the trees, after 3 consecutive years of replanting, there are no trees there. So we finally figured out, by happenstance, as I was drilling another one of the holes to plant an apple tree in, the main 6-inch clay pipe that was put in sometime in the 1910s to drain the entire back area, all of this farmland, that the drain line where all those 4-inch clay tiles come into goes right there. And over the years, it's broken, it's separated. That is the wettest piece of dirt on the property. And there is not a single apple tree that, has grown in that area. So, number 1 rule, do not plant where an apple tree will have wet feet. Number 2 is make sure that you plant, if you're going to have 3 trees in your backyard for production, make sure those 3 trees are compatible with each other. Some trees cross-pollinate, some don't require a pollinator. And again, we learned the hard way in this area that we had planted trees that basically fought each other. We also had trees that bloomed in late May going into early June, and I'll talk a little bit about that on the next 2 slides. Late blooming trees are a huge no-no in this part of the world. So when you're looking to pick a type of apple, for us, it's all about having a balanced cider. And there's 3 characteristics you look for: sweet, tart, and bitter. And the old English saying is do 1/3, 1/3, 1/3. 1/3 sweet varieties, 1/3 of your tart varieties, and 1/3 of your bitter. And the reason for that is the sweet is going to give you enough sugar so that you get somewhere between a 6 and 9% alcohol content in your cider. The tart says that you're going to have an acid, so it's going to give it a little bit of bite, so it's not going to be just syrupy. And the bitter gives you the astringency. That's basically how long the flavor kind of stays on your tongue. So a well-balanced cider has all 3 of those. Now, other characteristics that we looked for are specialty apples that will give you color. There are only about 5 apples that will give you a rosé colored juice, and Red Streak and Geneva are 2 of them, and that's about 1/3 of our planting for it. So if you're looking for cider, those are the characteristics that you look for. If you're just going to eat the apples, those are the same characteristics. You just need to decide what kind of an apple you want. The stuff you buy at the grocery store is all in that top category, sweet. And that's the reason if you try to make cider out of something that you buy at a grocery store, it is really kind of watery for you. So given all that, what are some good apples for the Northern Neck that we have learned? We started out with 68 varieties. We took this shotgun approach. We're now down to around 40. The main ones that we ripped out were those trees where you saw the holes, where they were fighting each other. And anything that blooms beyond the 3rd week in April is a fire blight, come visit me bullseye. Our fungal and bacterial counts here, and the temperatures and the humidity, once you get into late April, you have to be willing to spray every 4 days on a tractor. And I'm also the sprayer, and I'm not willing to do that, so they all went away. So in the early bloom category, and these are, how many folks recognize any of these names? A few? Okay. So the Virginia Hughes crab is an heirloom. It goes back to the early 1700s. People don't realize crab apples are most of the basis of some of the best ciders out there. They have the 1/3, 1/3, 1/3 blend already in the apple for it. The one that was an absolute surprise to us is, where is it? Cox's Orange Pippin. Pippins are an English apple, and they are notoriously very, very finicky and hard to grow, but it is a delicious apple. Our experience with Cox's Orange Pippin has been off the charts. It's easy to maintain, it's easy in terms of fertilizer, it's very resistant to cedar apple rust. And then from the cider production, it's in that same category as 1/3, 1/3, 1/3. So these are guys, early bloom. These guys are starting to bloom right now. Had we not had 25-degree temperature last night, they probably would be blooming tomorrow. So they're going to be on a 1-week delay. But these guys will bloom, depending on our weather, anytime the third last week of February through the second week of March, which means you're picking these apples in August, which is a wonderful time to pick apples in this part of the world, trust me. Ask Sue and Ben. The mid-bloom folks will vary a little bit more. They'll start maybe the last week of March, but again, they're typically done by that third week of April for it. The workhorses for us in this group are the American Golden Russet, the AGR as we call it, Yates, and Liberty. Liberty for a home apple is a great apple. You can get it in a semi-dwarf, so it won't grow over 10 feet or so. And it is a very prolific producer, and it cans well, it cooks well, it's just an all-around good apple. On the mid-bloom, Cox's Orange Pippin, I would recommend that to anybody. You can get it in a mini dwarf. You can get it, so it goes into a pot. You can get it into a dwarf. You can get it as a semi-dwarf, and you can get it as a big tree. And I've got some resource lists where you can find these. The other one that's a workhorse for us is the black twig. This is probably our most prolific tree now, and they produce apples that are about like that. They are so large that many of them we have to cut before we can actually put it into our crusher. That's how large they are. So, you know where you're going to plant it, you know what you're going to plant, you got it in the ground, now we start the maintenance of it. And guess what, folks? Pruning. Yes, it happens every year. We have 2,000 apple trees, so we have a lot of apple twigs. This is, believe it or not, is out of one orchard, 300 trees. This is what we call the East Orchard over on Bluff Point. That's how much, and then there were two more stacks that size that came out of that orchard. The rule of thumb is you want to be able to throw a cat through the tree. If your cats are like ours, we have 8 stray adopted cats. They're about this big around, so a normal cat would be the rule of thumb. Once folks start seeing the blooms, people start thinking, oh, it's time to start spraying. No, 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 no. The time to start spraying is late winter and end of January, first or second week of February, when you can find a temperature period and rain period that's conducive. The most important sprays for apples are in those two periods. And the most important thing that you're spraying for is basically preventive. So in those periods, you can spray with your dormant oils, so you're smothering all the bad bugs and all the eggs that they left for you. And then you're also smothering all of those fungal and bacterial blights. So the time to spray, late winter, early spring. You're looking for a window where you're not going to have rain within a 5-day period. Around here, that's a challenge. But for us, it's a challenge because it takes us 3 days to spray 2,000 apple trees. So if you're a little bit more modest in the number of trees you have, it might be a little bit easier. But basically, all of your sprays are good for 5 days without any type of rain for them. A lot of folks ask, how much do you spend on chemicals? Well, you can spend a lot on chemicals, but you can also mix a lot of these things with things that you've got in the house. The little copper pot there is to visualize copper. I didn't have anything other than the big 50-pound bags of copper we bought. Copper is one of your best friends for these dormant sprays. Copper basically is an element, and it will manage both cedar apple rust and all of your blights, first and secondary blights that come along. Then just your wonderful, I don't use Smart Balance, I usually use vegetable oil or canola, lighter oils, a non-degreaser. Dawn detergent does not work for this. You want to have a soap that will act more as a cleaner. Think of it as something that's helping all that other stuff stick together. But it also helps in terms of the insect population. Hydrogen peroxide and baking soda, those two mixed together, besides giving you a little foam action, is great for powder mildew. So instead of buying that $30 for 8 ounces of tree spray, you can just mix up your own in the kitchen. Just buy an old blender or go to an auction and get one that label says garden use only. Okay, so now you've planted them, you know how to maintain them. What do you do with it? So you pick the apples, you store them. People don't realize, but to get the best production and crush out of apples, we store them from 4 to 6 weeks, and that allows all of the starches to turn to sugar for you. So we store, we crush, we ferment, we age, condition if it's in a cider that we want to condition, and that can be conditioned in oak or in any other type of barrel. Bottle it, and then of course the most important step, enjoy it. Harvesting for us is an all hands on deck. All 3 of us. We put on our duds and out we go, and then we call to our neighbors and say, "Oh, wouldn't you all like to come and participate with us?" We have picked as early as the first week after 4th of July, believe it or not. But typically it starts in August. You know, August is such a temperate time here. It's so nice and cool. There's no humidity. It is such a wonderful experience. That's the reason we start at like 6 o'clock in the morning and we're done by 9:30, you know, so you can only take so much of it. It is a manual process. You pick them by hand, you put them in totes, you take those totes, you load them up, you take them to the cooler, you turn around and you do it all over again. This past year we picked over 50,000 pounds of apples, so that is a lot of up and down. You do not have to go to the gym during that period. How we crush them? So the step before this is the actual mashing. Just think of what you would use to chip your twigs or debris in the trees. It looks very similar to that. And it just has a different head and a motor on it. You throw in the apples, apples go in the chute, and mush comes out the bottom. Mush goes into the tub. We use the bladder in the inside is a water bladder. Water pressure pushes out, all of the juice comes out on the sides, it gets collected at the bottom, goes into containers, and then we transfer that into 55-gallon drums, where then we start the fermentation process for it. And we make hard apple cider at the end of it. Since this picture, we now have a 4th one that we call simple cider, which really should be called mutt cider. It's everything that's left over. That's not in one of those 3 bottles. Oops. That's what goes into the 4th bottle. And we also sell in growlers, and as I mentioned, this year we're looking to go into wholesale production. So with that, some resources, some practical resources. County Extension, Master Gardeners, and for Northumberland, they're both located in the same spot. So it's at the library, the Northumberland Library. The University of Missouri, believe it or not, and that's the website for them, they have the best, what I would call all around home orchard and fruit production website you'll find. And even though it says it's for home use, that's still what I use. And I've used this for probably over 10 years for it. It's got spray schedule, it's got pest management, it's got the whole 9 yards for it. So I highly recommend that if you're interested in any type of fruit production. To get apple trees of this type, so not your average go down to Lowe's or Home Depot, Cummins Nursery, which is located up in New York. They do specialty and they do all by mail order and UPS delivery. Century Apple Orchard is a family-owned orchard. It has been in production, same family, for over 100 years. They're located in the Raleigh-Durham area. And they have some unbelievable, and that's where a lot of the southern apple resource trees are used for extension agencies up and down the East Coast. And then locally, Albemarle, outside of Charlottesville, they have a cidery, but they also have an apple production tree. And they've got a website, and they've got pictures of all the apples and the description of them. They're a little expensive, but they're local. So that took us through basically all of the apple production. But the one thing I kind of glossed over, 2,000 trees means you dug 2,000 holes. And in our case, that's a tractor with an 18-inch auger, and you're going down almost 30 inches in the ground. So we laid out all of the orchards, nice little flags, poles on the tractor, I'm with the auger in the back, and it's all about production, all about production. So down goes the auger, up comes the dirt, and I'm seeing all this stuff come out of the dirt. And he's like, no, production, we gotta go. So this next three slides are kind of the image of what we found throughout the property, and talks a little bit about what are the next steps for us. Let's go back. The arrowheads that we found, and everyone knows that the northern neck is one, was highly populated by Native Americans. There is a study that's been ongoing now for 5 years through St. Mary's City, Maryland, and St. Mary's College, Dr. Julie King, and they are mapping the Native American Indians along the Rappahannock River. They are in their last year of that research project, which goes basically from Warsaw down to the mouth of the Rappahannock. We were contacted by them. Obviously, we're not on the Rappahannock, but they knew about Ditchley because of a study that was done in 1976 by the Smithsonian. And apparently the Smithsonian group showed up, walked away with 40 boxes. We don't know if it's a shoebox or a seafood box of artifacts that they picked up across Ditchley Road on what we call the Prentice Creek side. So because of that, they wanted permission to include us in the study, and we said yes. So sometime, this was supposed to start last year, but because of COVID, it's been, like everything else, delayed. At some point this year or next year, spring, we will have a group of archaeologists show up on our doorstep. They will do a GPS map overlay of the entire property. They will dig every 50 feet on center, do a 1-foot diameter hole until they hit hard pan clay. They'll sift. If they find 2 or more artifacts, and an artifact is defined anything that's not plastic. I said that's kind of broad, but okay. Then they're authorized to dig every 8 feet. So we're going to look like Patty Shack when all of this is done for it. They will catalog what they find. They will take pictures, but we get to keep all of the artifacts that they find. Based on the work done by the Smithsonian back in the 70s, our point on Prentice Creek Point was deemed as the most prolific Native American ceremonial site on the northern neck. Now, what ceremonial site means, I don't know, I guess we're going to find out. But what we started finding led us to believe something different was going on here. These 2 arrowheads that we found, and these were found in very different parts of the property, those are falsum points. A falsum point is anywhere from 10 to 13,000 years old. You do not find that on the East Coast. There are a few Clovis sites, and that's what predates, and it goes back to around 15,000. There's a few of those sites on the eastern or western side of the Shenandoah area, but nothing of that age has been cataloged or found so far in if you would title or East Coast area. So when the archaeology team from Julie saw those, they were just doing backflips. The other thing you don't find white flint in this part of the world. You don't find flint in this part of the world, period. So the closest flint outcroppings are all the way out into the Shenandoah Valley. But it's been known for a long time that the Indians traded beads, shells for flint to bring back on this area. But you don't see white. This is something that you see more way up in the northern Great Lakes, New York, and then out going into the Great Plains areas. So all of these together started telling a picture that there are artifacts in an Indian village that aren't normal to this part of the world, and would indicate that somebody, Indians or somebody else, were bringing in these things and trading for something else. And so that's the piece of the equation that the team will be really focusing on. Some of the other stuff that we found, this is a Georgian weight. It's about the size of your palm. It's bronze. This would have been probably part of the set. So remember I said that Hancock was a trader, T-R-A-D-E-R. So just like today, we have to get our scales certified by Weights and Measure to be able to sell. He would have been issued a set of scales by the Crown that he would weigh goods for when he sold them. So this was probably part of one of those sets. The spoons, both of these were found together. We took those down to Williamsburg. Those go back to the 1500s. So they probably came across the pond with somebody as part of their original kitchen outfitting. These two are coins. They're called pieces of 8. So way back when, you had a coin and you could punch it and perforate it to get change. That's how you made change. It's called pieces of 8. One dates back to the early 1700s. The other is back to the 1500s. So the thing that's interesting, I think, from a bigger picture is here are tender pieces of money that were old even back then and appear to still have been in circulation and still being used. I mean, today, I don't know about you guys, but I have some pounds from the UK that are back from the 80s. You know, they're not worth the paper they're printed on. You know, they recalled them like 15 times. Apparently that was not the case back then. And then we started getting smart about it. We realized that as you find stuff in holes, it starts to tell a picture. So we did, much to the other half's chagrin, stop, take time, put on a little chart where we had found things and make notes so that we could come back later to try to identify what was the rest of the story going on with that. And our pigs, actually, believe it or not, have been some of the best archaeological group that we have on the property. They found all of the, oops. Oh well, I think I just blew up the PowerPoint. But anyway, the pigs have found almost all of the original bricks that have glazing that basically taught us to understand the difference between just a brick and a brick that was in a house because it's glazed for it. Yeah. So that gives you kind of a rundown of who Ditchley is, what we do at Ditchley, what apples we chose to plant based on our location, what we do with those apples, and kind of what the next phase is for Ditchley. Kind of goes hand in hand with archaeology, pigs, and things under the dirt. With that, I'll open up for any questions. Yes, I have, but it's rather expensive. Exactly, it's very expensive, and what we found is that we basically do the homemade version on a very. So I buy oil at 55 gallons at a time, but on a smaller basis, neem oil does the same thing.
Kathy, you mentioned apple cider rust. Did you cut down cider?
This.
Cedar. Did you cut any of the cedar trees down?
No, we just have too many. And so the approach for the cedar apple rust is the copper. Hydrated copper applied twice a year gives you basically protection from the spores. But the bigger thing is selecting trees that are resistant to the cedar apple rust. Yep. And cedar apple rust will wipe you out. I mean, it usually takes about 3 years, but trees don't survive once they get it.
For a group to rent your facility for an event, what kind of rate is that?
We are open for negotiations. We do anything from just a sit down. We've done groups of 30 just for a tasting. You know, a tasting is $6 for the full tasting. We do lunches anywhere from 15 to 25 depending per person, depending on the lunch, and then dinners depending on how formal or fancy you want it. We do anything from around 45 to 75, so anything in between.
What made you decide to get into apple ranching?
Lunacy.
I don't know, I mean, why did you pick apples?
So-
That's not your background.
No, it's not. And it was really, once we decided that, it was kind of a bigger picture. We were either going to find a project big enough to keep us both occupied, or we were going to sell out and become ski bums someplace in British Columbia. And from a baseline agriculture product, we knew that we needed something in the beverage line. And we decided early on that we just didn't want to get into the wine business because there were so many other folks already in it. And it was a lot of the, presentation that Virginia Tech was giving that there was that infrastructure, because I really wouldn't have thought about it just because you don't see apple trees, in this part of the world. So it was really Virginia Tech was the initial impetus. And then the more research I did on it, I was like, hey, this makes sense. And oh, by the way, this is where a lot of the original apple trees came from. So it's doable.
Yeah.
How are you controlling plum curaco and firewood?
Fire blight, the number one was ripping out. We ripped out almost 300 trees that were the late bloomers. So anything that blooms beyond the third week of April is gone. Then it's this preventative spraying. The copper hydroxide is one of the main ingredients for that. So it was spraying late winter and early spring to smother. And then if you see fire blight, immediately you got to cut it out. Even if it's the whole tree, it's better one go than all 2,000 go. And then if you get a strike, or I'm now getting a feel for it, if the weather conditions really, if the humidity, the temperature, if all that comes together for the perfect storm, then I do go ahead and spray with streptomycin, agriculture streptomycin for it. The plum curculio, was that the critter? So if you don't know what that is, it looks like a black scorpion, and it's about like yay big. They overwinter in the underbrush, and they start coming out this time of year. I wish I had a picture, but my runner ducks are linebackers. They are on wing to wing. You can't get them to come in. They're out there for the night. So you're going to lose one or two to an owl, but there's not going to be a single one of plum curculios that get through that line. That is like el delicacy.
Yeah, you said you kept guinea fowl. Is that true?
Yeah. Would you like some?
No, I don't wait to eliminate ticks.
Yeah, we have no ticks. We only have them at Bluff Point. We've tried 5 or 6 times to do birds at Ditchley, and we just have too heavy of a coyote and a fox predation problem. But at Bluff Point, we have at one point we had 36 stray cats. We are now down to 8. But they live outside.
Sure.
Oops.
Behind you.
Don't step.
Turn around.
There we go. That's reason. None of the cats have ticks, and they are outdoor cats.
Yeah, I know that's the
We
great,
have-
the best word for it.
It is, but boy, are they noisy.
How about quail? Have you ever saw the quail?
I have not. I have not. And don't mention that to my husband.
Are you near Pine Ridge Road?
Yes, we're right
So
on it.
you're experimenting with the fire blight and who's resistant? I was over at Diddy's Greens and
Yep.
saw your orchard.
Yep.
Oh, okay. And your geese.
Yeah, and the geese and the turkeys that are in
So
there.
you're just eliminating which species of trees
Yep.
are somewhat resistant to fire blight.
Anything in that particular orchard, we had 10 trees that were given to us by Cummins Nursery called Major, which is a new, relatively new, it's maybe a 20-year-old variety of cider apple tree that's supposed to be the best things in sliced bread, but for northern climates, and so they wanted us to try it in the southern. Gone. That's part of that pile. It just, it started to bloom like the first week of May, and it would bloom through June. So it was just a magnet for fire blight.
So when you prune, do you take like a third of the tree or 10%?
Well, the reason the piles are so big this year is we didn't prune last year. So it's 2 years in once. But if you do it right, you should be taking out maybe 15% of the tree. And your first really big prunes are your first 2 years. Once you get your scaffold set, you want to have kind of looks like a peace sign, one straight up the middle, two coming out this way, and then you let it fill in from there. You don't have to have as open a canopy as the people that are doing fruit, because you don't care if you have some blemishes or some variation in size, because you're going to squash them all. But if you're going for a presentation apple, you want as much open canopy as you can get. Bill?
Well, I was going to say, turn the mic away from the speaker.
That works. Yes, sir.
One of my best apples is a Gold Rush. Have you tried that?
We have. And Gold Rush does work fine. Gold Rush is a good, and Gravenstein, which comes out of the same family, is somewhat, but a Gold Rush is actually better than Gravenstein. I don't know if I'm going to let you speak or not.
Can't just, don't let me.
You obviously do all the work. What does Paul do?
It's his nails done with you for those, those purple colors that you. No, so my husband Paul is a retired vice admiral. Did 36 years on active duty. When he retired as NavAir on a Friday, he had 36,000 people working for him on Saturday morning. It was a rude awakening because he now worked for me. So no, he's over minding the shop right now. So yeah, he does more than his share of the up and down lifting. Trust me.
Do you have any problem with the Asian hornets eating the whole apple inside?
Yeah, and that one is kind of a challenge. The turkeys will take care of a good portion of those, so we don't have as much at the Bluff Point orchards with that. We do have a problem with them at the Ditchley area.
The sprays don't seem to.
They don't-
I've been
they don't.
using kale and clay because I don't want to be around the poisons as much.
They are.
does-
I'm actually going. There's some traps that have been recommended, and I'm going to try those this year and see if it works for it. Part of our, they really come in when fruit starts to get overripe on a tree. So if you can pick underripe to just that ripe, you won't have as much of a problem. For us, that's always a challenge because there's always some trees that get ahead of us in production. But Google traps for those. It looks kind of like a modified fly trap.
Fusion tracks.
You put it away. Yeah. Yes, ma'am.
Stink bugs?
Stink bugs we typically get rid of with this early spray. So the dormant sprays, and let me put it this way. For the stink bugs that overwinter outside, for those stink bugs that overwinter in your house, like we have a whole lot of them, that's where we use the vacuum cleaner and then burn the vacuum bag. Yes, sir.
I know she had Christ mold in there, and I remember as a child, my grandparents had that, and that was a delicious
It is.
apple.
It is. It is fabulous.
Is that a good pollinator?
Yes.
I believe it is. Yeah. Yeah. I think it is.
Where's the best place to find that?
If you want a mature tree, or I mean like a 2-year-old tree, Albemarle has them. I was on their website like last week. They have them in stock, and you can buy them starting probably in the next 2 weeks. And I think they will ship too.
What's the question?
Grimes Golden.
One more question?
Any refreshments in the back?